Hey guys, it's your boy Woke Nation and welcome to Woke Nation Animation. On this segment of the channel, we speak on turning our past trauma into triumph. Part 2, Being Afraid. So it was around November 2016 and I finally reached my goal of saving up around £2,000, the cost of attending a 3-day property course out in West London. The course was run by a couple of property entrepreneurs who have been doing this for 25 years plus, teaching unorthodox property methods, entrepreneurship, mindset, sales, and negotiating. And I couldn't wait to get started. So the weekend finally arrived, and after managing to book myself 3 days off work, I was on my way to London. Going from Berkshire into London, I remember taking the underground and getting lost on my first day. Here I was on the platforms going to the east side of London instead of West London, where the events were held. In conversation with one of the train station staffs, after showing me where to go, she looked at me and said, "Where you going dressed so smart?" Referring to my clothes. I was wearing a grey suit with a black jacket over it. I told her where I was going. She smiled and asked, "Are you going to be one of the property millionaires?" I smiled back and said yes. She looked back with a broad smile on her face and replied, "Nice to see someone doing something different." The reason why I remember this conversation still 5 years on is because this lady worked at the barriers. So she sees hundreds if not thousands of people who 90% of them going back and forth from their 9 to 5s and home, vice versa. Now the truth is 5 years on, I'm not a property millionaire yet, but I guess seeing me do something different refreshed that lady's day somehow. Courage, the ability to do something which frightens one, bravery, Coyote Iwumi. Well, throughout that whole weekend, I had to do a lot of things which scared me, which frightened me. And even though this video falls under trauma talk, it was more like an experience which elevated me later on in my life as opposed to a trauma. So on the first day, as I walked inside the lavish venue, I saw between 200 to 300 people networking. I'm talking bankers, investors, businessmen, lawyers, property investors, property entrepreneurs. These are the people I'm going to be spending the next 3 days with. It also turned out that I was actually the youngest in this room. And during that moment in my life, I was just a support worker who supported autistic kids in an autism school. A job that I appreciated, but this is where I belong. Over the 3 days, we learned a significant amount about property entrepreneurship, different methods, mindset, and performed various group tasks. Now these tasks included such methods as structuring a deal, group presentations in front of the whole room on how to structure a deal, and many other situations over the 3 days. It definitely made me feel like I was out of my comfort zone, but nothing was going to prepare me for what happened on the final day. So it was on the final hour of the last day of what has been an already life-changing weekend for me. Our host and our teacher at the time, Vincent Wang, the guy that was making nearly $1 million just over the 3 days, touched on the topic of negotiating, and he asked a generic question. Now I thought this was just a generic question, and I put my hand up. He asked, "Who here thinks they can negotiate?" Obviously me being me, I put my hand up, and he pointed right at me and said, "You, come on stage." Little did I know we were about to do a little role play on stage. So he was going to play the supposedly motivated seller, and I was going to play the highly skilled negotiator who's somehow going to find out the seller's motivation, why they want to sell, and how desperate they are to get rid of the property. Then I was to persuade the seller that I could find a buyer, cash or mortgage, but only if we agree on a 15% discount on the property, so I'll be able to move the property on quicker. Now that 15 to 25% I'll be able to get from the buyer that I find for the seller. This sounds easy, right? But it was far from. As one of the assistant ladies passed me the mic, Vincent took his place up on stage, sitting down as if he's at home, waiting for a phone call. As soon as I received the mic, my heart started beating really fast. 1,000 ways of how this is going to go racing in my mind. And as I began to open the dialogue, I felt my voice breaking. I could feel the tense silence from the crowd. Nervous, stuttering. Yeah, it was going to be a long 10 minutes. So as we started negotiating on stage, at first I was doing okay. I was saying my lines. But long story short, the whole thing couldn't have gone any worse. I fumbled the whole thing. And surprise, surprise, I couldn't close the deal. So to put me out of my misery, Vincent sent me back to my seat to debrief the whole situation and pointed out the things that I did and didn't do well, which were many by the way. Ultimately, me and the rest of the audience learned from my failed attempt. But just as I started to recover from the whole situation, I heard someone call my name. It was Vincent. I answered and he asked in front of everyone, "Would you like to come and try again?" I had seconds to think. All eyes on me, people waiting for my response. At first, I felt a great resistance to go back on stage because I felt like I would embarrass myself again. But then I thought about it real quick and I said, you know what? Surely it can't get any worse. So I went back on stage. I still couldn't close the deal. But the second time around, I was so much better. No stuttering, no stumbling over my words. And I was actually remembering everything I learned from the last few days in that moment. Now, as I sit and think back to that moment, yes, it could have been business suicide. You could say I showed my vulnerability in that moment and my lack of experience in property, and therefore I could have got was down to the bin because they would have thought this guy was amateur. But actually the opposite happened. I received a standing ovation from the crowd and some very encouraging words from Vincent on stage. Shortly after our graduation ceremony, something really interesting happened. As I was having conversations with a few people, I had men, different ages, 20s, 30s, 40s. Now I'm sure most of these men were more financially secure than me at that time, but they came up to me, gave me a compliment and thanked me for going up stage, giving me compliments for having the balls to go up stage and be vulnerable up there. One particular older guy who was in his 60s and he was actually attending the program with his son who ran their business came up to me and literally told me, "Well done, that took a lot of balls, thank you." And I'm pretty sure if I didn't do that, I wouldn't have networked or known that many people that I got to know afterwards. Why? Because it's not about what you have externally. It's not about your financial riches. It's not about the materials. We all came into this world naked and we shall die naked. It's about what's inside of you, your soul, your heart. After signing up for the course that weekend, the second best decision I made was to go on stage. An act of courage. On my train journey on the way home, as I sat back and unraveled the whole weekend, the conversation with the train lady, all the different conversations I had throughout that weekend, networking, going on stage, taking part in activities, even though I had less than £100 in my bank account at the time, none of those things mattered. The only thing that mattered is how I saw myself and how I see my future going, my vision. So life, therefore, is merely a point of view as opposed to your circumstances.